Hello, my name's Dr. Justin Coulson. I have a question from somebody who's a subscriber to Parent TV who's wanting some help with sibling conflict and sibling rivalry. This is the question. It says, I have identical twin boys and they're so competitive. They fight all the time. I always dreamed that my twins would have a close, loving relationship, but they fight and argue constantly. They're in their teens now, but this has been going on for some years and doesn't seem to be improving. I understand their need to establish their own identities and so on, but I fear that they are permanently damaging their relationship. What can I do to help them? So I've given this some considerable thought because sibling conflict and sibling rivalry is just such an awful thing. You know, as parents, we've got these kids and we love them so much, and to see them fighting with each other and treating one another badly, it makes us feel awful. Sometimes it makes us feel like we're failing. But more than that, we just love our kids and we want them to love each other like we love them. There's a few things that I say to parents when they're dealing with these kinds of challenges. The first thing is that it is really important that they establish their own identity, and usually the best way to work out who you are is to push against somebody else. You know, it's about, if somebody says to do this and I want to prove that I'm my own person, I say no. I push back, and force creates resistance. It's that force that helps me to create a sense of identity. So in some ways, this may be a healthy response. Of course, if it gets too bad around bullying or beating each other up, calling one another names, then that's dysfunctional. That's not healthy, and we need to step in. The second thing that I usually say is, as an adult, if you have siblings, how old were you before you really started to get along well with your siblings? Most people acknowledge that while there are some exceptions, it usually takes us well into our 20s, sometimes even our 30s, or longer, before we feel like we can get on really well with our siblings. Siblings are, as Charles Schulz in the Peanuts cartoon said, siblings are the crab tree in the grass of life, or the crabgrass in the lawn of life. They just get in the way, they bother us, and that even happens when we're adults. The thing to remember there as well is that we often don't get along with our siblings until we've found our own house. We're not living in the same house, the same street, the same suburb, and sometimes even the same state before we start getting along with them. And the third thing that I suggest is that we've chosen to be with a person, usually, you know, assuming we're partnered or we have a spouse, we've chosen to be with a person for the rest of our lives. And yet we even struggle to get along with them. In fact, sometimes we have significant conflict with the love of our lives. So our children haven't necessarily chosen their siblings. You know, they've been born into this family and this is who they've got. And we're expecting them to get on with somebody who can quite often be very, very different from them. Or, in many cases, far too similar. So how do we deal with this sibling challenge with those three things in mind? Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is recognize that conflict isn't in and of itself a bad thing. Conflict gives us something to push against. It helps us to work out who we are. It helps us to grow. It helps us to navigate social boundaries and challenges and those kinds of things. So conflict can be good for us socially, so long as it doesn't become dysfunctional and harmful. The second thing that I'd suggest is that we can also look to examples where conflict and sibling rivalry has led people to exceptional outcomes. Serena and Venus Williams, the tennis sisters, are a great example of that. There's all sorts of examples through sport and in other areas as well. Now, so long as people aren't hinging their identity on being better than their sibling, so long as that competition is a positive thing and not a negative, I think that this can actually be helpful as well. But perhaps the most useful thing that I can share with you in this video is how to deal with things when there's conflict and rivalry and it gets ugly and nobody's talking to each other. How do we teach our kids to get along? In my book, 10 Things Every Parent Needs to Know, which I just happened to have had on my lap as we were talking, there's an entire chapter based on this. And I'm going to share what's in the chapter with you now so you don't have to buy the book. Of course, there's more in the chapter than we have time for me to share. But it's worth spending a minute or two on this. So if the kids are fighting, if there's some sort of sibling rivalry or some sort of sibling challenge, I recommend that we separate them, make sure that they can get through, you know, the next little while so we can have a proper conversation with them, and then talk to them about what I call the vicious circle. This is the vicious circle right here, and you can see that it's got 4 boxes. Those 4 boxes have a little bit of writing in and some arrows join each of the boxes. Sit the kids down, draw 4 boxes, and then pick on one of the kids. Simply say to them, hey, what did that person do to you? Once you've asked them that question, listen carefully. Now the other sibling's going to say, oh yeah, but... Say, no, you'll get a turn in a sec. I just want to hear their perspective. Once they've said it all and you've written it in that box there, move across to this box here and say, well, how did you feel when they did that? This is an important perspective-taking exercise for the other sibling, the one who may at this point perhaps have been the aggressor. We're saying to them, well, how did you feel when they did that? And write it all down. I felt upset, I felt angry, I felt revengeful, one of my kids said one day. Then go down the bottom here and say, so what did you do in response? This is when that other sibling finally gets to say, yeah, what did you do, huh? Because usually there's been some sort of retaliation. And so they have to own it. They can no longer be the victim that they've been in those first two boxes. They've got to own their stuff. They've got to get out of bed, blame, excuse, and denial, B-E-D, bed, blame, excuse, denial, and use their OAR, O-A-R, ownership, accountability, and responsibility. We ask them to own their stuff. Tell us what you did, and then how did your sibling feel? Once you've got this all done, you draw the arrows and you ask the kids, well, when you look at this little model, who do you think started it? I've got 3 questions for you. Who started it? At this point, they'll probably point at each other and say, they started it. Now, the correct answer to this question is it doesn't matter who started it. We're not interested in who started it. We want to make things better from here. So question number 2 is much more important, and that is who's contributing to it. Who's contributing to it? If they're honest, they'll recognize that if they're in this vicious circle, they're both contributing to it. And question number 3, who's responsible for fixing it? Now, contrary to what you might think, it's not up to both of them to fix it. Instead, it's up to each of them individually to take ownership and be responsible for fixing things. I can't control what the other person does, so I can't expect that they're going to fix things. It's up to me to make things better. But the other person also has to acknowledge that it's up to them to make things better. Hopefully that's helpful. If you have that conversation when emotions are calm, walk them through the vicious circle and get them to take ownership for their behaviour and work out how they're going to fix things. You then get to have a nice empowering conversation about, well, how could you fix things? What's required to do that? There's a whole bunch more in the chapter in my book, 10 Things Every Parent Needs to Know, but that should be enough to get you started, and hopefully that will help to make your family happier and help siblings to get along just that little bit better.